The autumn wind cut through Iron River, Michigan, like a blade on October 14, 2014. In this quiet corner of the Upper Peninsula, where everyone knew everyone and secrets were harder to keep than the bitter cold at bay, Christopher Carl Regan was about to make a choice that would seal his fate. At 53, Chris was a man who lived simply but loved deeply. He had no idea that on this ordinary Tuesday evening, he was walking into a trap that had been years in the making. A trap born from a twisted wedding vow that turned love into a death sentence. What Chris didn't know, as he prepared to meet his lover for what he thought would be another passionate encounter, was that his disappearance had already been planned. The woman he loved, Kelly Cochran, was bound by a pact more sinister than any marriage contract ever signed. In just a few hours, Chris Regan would become not just a missing person, but the center of a case that would expose the darkest corners of the human heart. Iron River was the kind of place where people came to disappear from the world, not disappear from life itself. Nestled in Michigan's rugged Upper Peninsula, it was a town of fewer than 3,000 souls, where the iron mines had once promised prosperity and now left behind a legacy of hardworking people who knew how to keep their heads down and their business to themselves. It was here that Christopher Regan had built his quiet life, working, living simply, and believing that love could still find him in his middle years. Kelly Cochran arrived in Iron River like a storm that looked like sunshine. Beautiful, charismatic, and married to Jason Cochran. She seemed to embody the kind of excitement that rarely visited the small town. But beneath her attractive exterior lay something far more dangerous. A woman bound by a promise that most people would dismiss as the fantasy of twisted minds. The truth was that Kelly and Jason Cochran had entered into their marriage with an understanding that went far beyond the traditional, till death do us part. They had made a pact on their wedding night in 2002 that if one of them ever cheated, would kill the person with whom they cheated. It was a covenant sealed not with rings and kisses, but with blood and violence as the ultimate penalty for betrayal. For 12 years, this pact had remained dormant, a sleeping beast waiting for the right circumstances to awaken. Those circumstances arrived in the form of Christopher Regan. Chris was everything that Jason Cochran was not. Where Jason was controlling and possessive, Chris was gentle and kind. Where Jason ruled through fear and intimidation, Chris offered Kelly something she had perhaps never experienced before: genuine affection without strings attached. Their relationship began innocently enough, the way most affairs do, with stolen glances and casual conversations that gradually deepened into something more meaningful. But in the Cochran household, nothing was truly innocent. Jason was aware of his wife's growing attachment to Chris, and rather than confronting the situation like most spouses would, he began to see it as an opportunity. The pact that had been made in darkness was about to be fulfilled in blood. Kelly Cochran was a master manipulator, a woman who could wear faces like masks, changing her personality to suit whatever situation demanded. To Chris, she was the loving, attentive woman who made him feel alive again. To Jason, she was the obedient wife who understood that their marriage operated by different rules than most. But to her, something far more calculating. A woman who had learned to navigate the dangerous waters of her husband's jealousy while feeding her own dark desires. The affair between Kelly and Chris had been building for months, and Jason knew every detail. This wasn't jealousy driving him to action. It was something far more sinister. Jason Cochran had found a way to commit the perfect murder, using his wife's infidelity as both justification and cover. As the relationship between Kelly and Chris deepened, so did the trap that was being set. Kelly began to exhibit strange behaviors that Chris, blinded by love and trust, chose to ignore or rationalize away. She would ask probing questions about his schedule, his habits, his routine. She wanted to know when he would be missed, who would look for him, how long it might take before anyone became concerned about his absence. Chris, like most people in love, believed that these questions came from a place of care and concern. He had no way of knowing that every answer he gave was being carefully cataloged, not by a loving girlfriend seeking to protect their relationship, but by a woman who was methodically planning his destruction. The irony was devastating. Chris thought he had found salvation in Kelly's arms. a chance at happiness in the middle of his life. Instead, he had stumbled into the web of two people who had made murder a condition of their marriage. Every kiss, every tender moment, every whispered promise of love was simultaneously a step closer to his grave. The details of what happened on the night of October 14th, 2014, would not emerge for years. But when they finally did, they would paint a picture of premeditation so cold and calculated that even seasoned investigators would struggle to comprehend the level of betrayal involved. Chris Regan received a call from Kelly that evening. She wanted to see him, she said. She missed him. She needed him. Ta was the kind of call that had become routine in their relationship, the sort of invitation that Chris had learned to anticipate with excitement rather than suspicion. He had no reason to believe that this night would be any different from the dozens of other nights when Kelly had summoned him to secret meetings. But this night was different in every way that mattered. Kelly had called Chris to the Cochran home in Caspian, Michigan, a location that should have raised red flags but didn't. Jason would be there, she told him. But they had worked things out. Her husband understood their relationship now and was willing to. The murder of Chris Regan had been intended to save their marriage, to fulfill the pact they had made and eliminate the threat to their union. Instead, it destroyed everything between. Kelly had been forced to participate in the killing of the man she loved, and the psychological trauma of that betrayal festered like an infected wound. Kelly later told investigators she killed her husband because he took the only good thing in her life in Regan's death. The pact that was supposed to protect their marriage had instead provided Kelly with the perfect justification for murder. On February 20th, 2016, Kelly Cochran killed her husband Jason with a fatal dose of heroin in Hobart, Indiana. She described it as a revenge killing and told investigators she had evened the score. The woman who had helped murder her lover now became the killer of her husband, completing a circle of violence that had begun with a twisted wedding vow. But Jason's death would prove to be Kelly's undoing. His murder brought her to the attention of law enforcement in a way that Chris's disappearance never had. When investigators began looking into Jason Cochran's death, they uncovered connections to the missing Chris Regan case in Michigan. Detective Jeremy Ogden of the Hobart, Indiana Police Department was investigating Jason Cochran's death when he began to suspect that Kelly's story didn't add up. Her explanations were too neat, too convenient, and her behavior suggested someone who was hiding far more than grief over her husband's death. What Ogden discovered through his investigation was a woman who defied easy categorization. Kelly Cochran was not simply a killer. She was something far more dangerous. She was a predator who used love and sex as weapons, who could manipulate emotions and exploit trust with a skill that bordered on the supernatural. During questioning, Kelly initially maintained her innocence in both deaths. But as the evidence mounted and the pressure increased, she began to reveal the truth about the pact that had started it all. She told detectives that when she and Jason were married in 2002, they made a pact that if one of them ever cheated, they would kill the person with whom they cheated, or be killed by their spouse if they refused. They had seen domestic violence cases before, but this was something different entirely. This was a marriage that had been built on the foundation of future murder, a union that anticipated and planned for violence as a natural consequence of infidelity. Kelly's confessions painted a picture of a relationship so toxic and so devoid of normal human emotion that it seemed to belong in the realm of fiction rather than reality. But the evidence supported every horrific detail of her story. Chris Regan's remains were eventually found in May 2016 along Pentoga Trail in Iron County, nearly 2 years after his disappearance. The discovery came after Kelly, now in custody, began cooperating with investigators and pointing them toward the locations where she and Jason had disposed of the body. The recovery of Chris's remains was both a victory and a tragedy for investigators. It provided the physical evidence they needed to build a case against Kelly. But it also confirmed the brutal reality of what had happened to a man whose only crime had been falling in love with the wrong woman. The forensic examination of the remains told a story of unspeakable cruelty. Chris had been shot, dismembered, and scattered across the wilderness like an animal carcass. There was nothing dignified or humane about his death or the disposal of his body. Even in death, he had been denied the basic respect that should be accorded to any human being. But the discovery of Chris's remains also provided investigators with something else. Leverage. Kelly Cochran might have been a skilled manipulator, but she was still human, and the weight of what she had done was beginning to crush her psychologically. The woman who had once seemed so confident and in control was beginning to crack under the pressure of her own actions. Kelly Cochran's trial for the murder of Chris Regan began in Iron County Circuit Court in 2017. She had pleaded guilty to killing her husband Jason, but she fought the charges related to Chris's death, maintaining that she had been coerced into participating in the murder. The trial revealed the full extent of the horror that had been visited upon Chris Regan. Prosecutors presented evidence of premeditation, manipulation, and cold-blooded murder. They showed how Kelly had used Chris's love for her as a weapon against him, how she had lured him to his death with promises of love and acceptance. Kelly's defense attorney argued that she had been coerced by her husband, that she was as much a victim as Chris Regan himself. But the evidence told a different story. Kelly had been an active and willing participant in the murder, someone who had helped plan and execute the killing of a man who trusted her completely. The jury deliberated for just 3 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on all charges. Kelly Cochran was convicted of first-degree murder in the death of Chris Regan and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As investigators continued to dig into Kelly Cochran's past, they began to suspect that Chris Regan and Jason Cochran might not have been her only victim. There were allegations that she may have killed as many as 9 people, though the identities and locations of these alleged victims remained a mystery. Even more disturbing were the rumors that began to circulate about what Kelly had done with Chris's remains. There were allegations that she had served his remains at a barbecue, forcing people to unknowingly consume the flesh of the man she had helped murder. While these claims were never proven in court, they added another layer of horror to an already unspeakable crime. Kelly Cochran had been dubbed the Devil Woman by investigators, and the nickname seemed to fit. She was someone who had turned love into a weapon, who had used the most fundamental human emotions as tools for manipulation and murder. She represented something that most people preferred not to acknowledge, the capacity for evil that could hide behind a beautiful face and a charming smile. The murder of Chris Regan sent shockwaves through the small communities of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. People who had known Kelly and Jason Cochran struggled to reconcile the couple they thought they knew with the monsters who had committed such horrific acts. For Chris's family and friends, the revelation of how he had died was almost too painful to bear. He had been a good man, someone who deserved love and happiness, not betrayal and murder. The fact that he had been killed by the woman he loved added a cruel irony to his death that made grief even more difficult to process. The case also had a profound impact on the investigators who worked to solve it. Detective Jeremy Ogden and former police chief Laura Frizzo had seen many cases during their careers, but the Cochran murders stood out for their sheer brutality and the calculated nature of the crimes. The investigation had required them to delve into the darkest aspects of human nature, to understand how 2 people could make murder a condition of their marriage, and then follow through on that pact with such cold determination. It was the kind of case that stayed with investigators long after the trials were over and the sentences were handed down. Understanding Kelly Cochran required going beyond the simple labels of killer or psychopath. She was a complex individual whose capacity for manipulation and violence seemed to stem from a unique combination of psychological factors. Kelly had demonstrated an ability to compartmentalize her emotions and actions in ways that defied normal human psychology. She could participate in the brutal murder of her lover and then continue, living as if nothing had happened. She could kill her husband in revenge, and then present herself as a grieving widow to investigators. This level of emotional detachment suggested someone who viewed other people not as human beings with their own worth and dignity, but as objects to be used and disposed of when they were no longer useful. Chris Regan had been useful to Kelly as long as he provided the excitement and affection she craved. But when the Pact demanded his death, she was able to participate in his murder without apparent remorse. The marriage pact itself revealed something equally disturbing about both Kelly and Jason Cochran. Most couples who make wedding vows promise to love, honor, and cherish each other. The Cochrans had promised to kill for each other, to make murder a expression of their commitment to their marriage. This inversion of normal marital values suggested a relationship that was built on control, possession, and violence, rather than love and mutual respect. It was a union that anticipated betrayal and planned for it with the ultimate punishment. Chapter 11. The investigation techniques. The investigation into Chris Regan's murder showcased both the challenges and the innovations in modern police work. Investigators had to piece together a complex puzzle with very few physical clues and suspects who were skilled at deception. Detective Jeremy Ogden's approach to questioning Kelly Cochran became a case study in interrogation techniques. Rather than confronting her directly with accusations, he built rapport and trust, allowing her to reveal information gradually. This patient approach eventually led to the confessions that broke the case open. The investigation also demonstrated the importance of multi-jurisdictional cooperation. Chris's murder had occurred in Michigan, but the key break in the case came through the investigation of Jason's death in Indiana. Without communication and collaboration between law enforcement agencies, the connection between the two cases might never have been discovered. Technology played a crucial role as well. Cell phone records, financial transactions, and other digital evidence helped investigators piece together the timeline of events and corroborate Kelly's eventual confessions. The legal proceedings in the Cochran case were complicated by the multiple jurisdictions involved and the complex nature of the crimes. Kelly faced charges in both Michigan and Indiana, and prosecutors had to coordinate their efforts to ensure that justice served in both states. Kelly was sentenced to life in prison without parole in May 2017 for Regan's murder, and received an additional 65 years for Jason's murder in Indiana. The sentences ensured that she would never be free to harm anyone else. The trials also provided a public forum for the full scope of Kelly's crimes to be revealed. The evidence presented in court painted a picture of calculated evil that shocked even seasoned legal professionals. Kelly's appeal of her conviction was rejected, confirming that the legal system had functioned as intended despite the complex and horrific nature of the crimes involved. The murder of Chris Regan stands as a testament to the capacity for evil that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly normal lives. Kelly and Jason Cochran appeared to be an ordinary married couple living in small-town America, but beneath that facade lay a relationship built on violence and a pact that turned love into a death sentence. Chris Regan's story is ultimately a tragedy of misplaced trust and love. He was a good man who fell in love with a woman who was incapable of genuine love in return. His death serves as a reminder that evil can wear many faces, and that the people we trust most can sometimes be the ones who pose the greatest danger. For investigators and legal professionals, the case provided insights into the complexities of modern criminal investigation and the challenges of prosecuting cases that span multiple jurisdictions.